Welcome to Mr. and Mrs. Creeps. Tonight's story is about a young mother who hears and sees the unexplained. Please note, while this story is for entertainment purposes only, the audio you are going to hear is real. It was the end of a very long day, and the baby was fussy at bedtime, but with a little patience, she finally fell asleep in her mother's arms as they lay in bed. Nicole saw her opportunity as the baby had drifted so deep into sleep that her little face had smushed into the bed, and she began to breathe heavier and heavier. Like an experienced cat burglar, she slipped an arm out from underneath her little angel and slid quietly out of bed. She creaked the door open, and her loyal dog, Belle, followed behind her as she walked through. Nicole made herself a cup of tea while putting Belle and her other dog, Cooper, out for a late-night break. It was nice to have the house quiet and peaceful. After quicking up a bit and letting the dogs back in, Nicole skillfully peeked in on her daughter and then made her way to the computer to edit some photos she had taken earlier in the week. The tea was warm and full of flavor, and the photos were mostly shot so well that little editing would be required. This made her very thankful because even though she was enjoying some rare alone time, she was tired and ready to lay down for the night. There was this loud clanking noise from an old dryer vent pipe that ran from the ceiling to the floor, which made her jump. She heard stink bugs clanking around in there before, but this was notably louder. It made her wonder if there was a small bird or a bat that had somehow got past the vent guard on the roof. She quickly moved the dogs out of the room just in case this little creature did make its way down to the opening, and she closed the door right behind him. The perks of having a husband who works C-shift is there's always enough room in the bed for her, the little one, and the dogs, but nights like tonight where she may have to handle an uninvited guest, the dogs, and the baby made her wish her husband was by her side. She stood there quietly, holding her breath, listening intently to the wall. The banging had started to travel not down as she expected it to, but rather horizontally and closer to the center of the house. She now was thinking there might be an animal in the attic, and her heart sank. Bat or bird would be bad enough, but some time, patience, and a blanket could handle all that. But a squirrel or a raccoon in the attic filled her with dread. She picked up the phone and called her husband, which is something that she never did, so he should know that this was important and he needed to pick up, but he didn't. She sent him a text message to have him call her as soon as possible because she may need advice or she may need him to come home. She kept her eyes glued to the crease where the wall met the ceiling, where she could hear the erratic banging. Nicole was quickly going through all her options and found herself wondering if there would be any clues as to what was going on in the attic on the roof. The access to the attic needed a ladder, which was in the garage, and there was this heavy wood plank that had to be lifted into the attic to gain access. Because of this, she opted to check the roof first. She put on her trusty Crocs and grabbed a flashlight. It was cold outside, but she didn't think she would be out there long and brave the night air with just her t-shirt and leggings. There was still some snow on the ground, and she felt the need to take careful steps not to slip and fall as she headed into the backyard. Armed with her very bright flashlight, she guided it to the roof and had a moment of panic. What if there was something crazy up there that she wasn't prepared to see? Nicole laughed at herself and continued to scan the roof, looking for signs of damage or feathers. There was nothing on the back of the house. She walked to the side of the house and looked up and saw nothing. But as she headed to the front yard, she heard loud banging from just beyond the cemetery across the street. It was so loud, it almost sounded like Native American drumming, loud enough to be right across the street, but it was very clearly a distance away. She stood there in silence, trying to wrap her brain around what she was hearing that late at night. Nicole's thoughts were interrupted by the creaking of the back door. She immediately ran to make sure something wasn't getting into the house, and thankfully it was Belle coming out of the slightly opened door. Where Nicole was, so was Belle. Even now in the cold weather, she stood watching her intently. She left Belle in the backyard, sighing with relief since Belle was going to be guarding the door, and made her way back to the front of the house. She pulled out her phone and hit record, hoping to catch the sound on video. She scanned to the left and to right, stared deeply into the cemetery and the trees beyond it, trying to gain some insight into what was causing this weird percussion sound that made its way all the way into the house. The cold night bit at her bare skin, but she barely felt it as she was lost in curiosity. After recording for about a minute, she sent the video to her husband to ask if he had ever heard anything like this before. She noticed that he never texted back or called, and she was a little annoyed as she looked down at her phone. Just then, she heard her name being called off to the left. It startled her so much that she snapped her head up and almost dropped her phone. There was no one there, just the neighbor's empty yard, and she decided to send a message over to the neighbors just in case someone was standing in the dark. But all the lights were off in the house, so she was confident that they were sleeping. She almost felt a little guilty, but this banging sound was so abnormal that she didn't mind if she woke them up. Nicole's desire to know if there was something that she couldn't see grew, so she went back into the house and grabbed the night vision binoculars. She brought Belle inside, grabbed a jacket, the baby monitor, and a key to the house. She left strict instructions with Cooper and Belle that they were to stay with the baby no matter what. Cooper was a typical bully breed. He hated the cold, so he was happy to crawl into bed and snuggle up under the covers. Thankfully, with all the noise, the little one had not woken up. Belle, on the other hand, had protested, and she went right to the window to keep watch. Nicole sent another message to her husband that something weird was happening and that she was headed outside to check it out and locking the house just in case. He should hear from her shortly, and if he didn't, something was wrong and that he needed to come home ASAP. When she went out, she scanned the neighbor's yard, looking for whoever called her name, but there was no one there. Nicole thought maybe she had imagined it, and because she was so interested in that sound, she panned upwards just past the cemetery, and she was stunned. There were multiple orbs of light flying upward. They were yellowish white and varied in intensity and varied in size. She had never seen anything like that before. She dropped the night vision from her eyes just to confirm that they could not be seen with the naked eye. But the longer she watched, the more lights began to appear and change direction. They were flying horizontally and parallel to one another, and then they would shoot straight upward. Nicole reasoned that they could not be satellites or planes because in about an hour there were hundreds. She wondered if she was really witnessing UFO activity. She went back into the house, and by that time the banging had completely stopped. And like any normal person these days, she jumped on the town's social media page to discover that there was a large water main break. That at least explained the banging inside the house. That must have been the pipes. But she was unsure about that percussion sound outside. And even if that percussion sound was caused by the break, it still led her to this unexplained aerial phenomenon, and that's what consumed her now. Coincidentally, there was another water main break in a neighboring town. Nicole never cared for coincidences. Could the double water main break somehow have been caused by the UFO activity? She was going through all the options and reading the online posts when the phone rang, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. Her husband was calling. His voice was panicked, and she could tell there was a bit of an apology in there, too. She told him what was going on, and he didn't hesitate. He told her that he did not want her to go outside alone and to stay inside. She protested, saying that maybe this always happens, and tonight was the night that she finally caught it. He reminded her that the night vision binoculars used an infrared beam, and that meant if anybody was looking in her direction with night vision, they would very clearly see her. He did make a good point, and she promised to stay inside. She suddenly felt uneasy, kind of like she was being watched, so she walked over to the door and locked it. She checked the baby monitor to find the little one fast asleep with Coop lying at the end of the bed. He was a good dog to her. He always gave her space and lovingly put up with her learning curve on how to treat a dog. Belle was nervously pacing around Nicole as she hung up the phone and took off her jacket and trusty shoes. She tried to calm her down, but something was off. She ran back to the window, her hackles up. Nicole didn't see anything. She shushed Belle as quietly and sternly as she could, but Belle was having none of it. Nicole grabbed the night vision and thought to herself, okay, just one last look. And what she saw made her start to shake. Her pulse quickened and her throat became tight. There were 3 orbs just beyond the tree line across the street. She didn't know what to do. She knew with the night vision they might know exactly where she was, but without them, she wouldn't know anything. And she decided that they must already know someone was watching, and that's why they were making a beeline right for her. They were so bright, it was hard to look at them. There was no discernible shape. It was just an orb of light. And Belle lost her mind, snapping at the window and barking, and Cooper was quick to come in to back her up. Both the family dogs were ready to jump through the window and chase these things that encroached on their territory off. Nicole could barely take a breath. She was so terrified. And in a flash, the orbs went into what can only be described as hyperdrive and flew over the house. And there was no sound. There was no vibration. They were silent. The baby crying was the only thing that broke the trance of fear that Nicole was in. She rushed into the bedroom to find the little one safe, just shaken by the dog's barking. Nicole lay down and texted her husband to send him an update. He said he was on the way home. He loved them and wanted them to stay safe. Despite the adrenaline coursing through Nicole's veins, she passed out fairly quickly. And when she woke the next morning, she hit the town message boards to find no one else heard the percussion sound, even though there were several people awake at that time. And some of those people even went outside just because Nicole had mentioned it, and they didn't hear anything. And of course, no one saw the lights in the sky. The performance almost felt like it was only for her to see. Nicole sat across from her husband, drinking a very strong cup of coffee, and she wondered if more was coming. Good night. Sleep tight. Don't let the bedbugs bite. Under starry skies till morning light. Thank you for listening. Welcome to Mr. and Mrs. Creeps. Tonight's story is about 2 medics who are left running for their lives after an encounter with creatures not of this world. Paramedic Andrew Wise was enjoying the unseasonably warm weather with his window cracked while he sipped the worst hot cup of gas station coffee. He glanced at the clock on the dash. It was 2:45 a.m. So far, the night was slow, with only one call, which didn't require his skills, but rather his partner's. He wished it was more active, but he was also thankful that it wasn't. Sarah sat in the driver's seat, medical book in her lap, and sandwich in her hand. She was enjoying the lull in activity so she could continue to study. She didn't want to be a basic EMT forever, and Lord knows she could use the bump in pay. She smiled at Andrew and innocently said, "Man, it's quiet tonight." Andrew instantly tensed. He has 15 years on the job and knows that some words you just never say. Sarah took the first bite of her sandwich, and right on cue, a call came over the radio.
238, responding for 55-year-old male, chest pains with difficulty breathing, 7692 Tall Plains Road, Big Break, State Route 33, and Greenbrier.
Andrew shot Sarah a stern look while picking up the mic.
238 en route.
10-4, en route, 248.
Sarah put her sandwich in the cup holder and threw her book in the pocket behind her seat and pulled out of their hideaway behind the gas station. The address was at least 7 minutes away in the hills of the mountains. She put on the lights and sirens and pushed the bounds of the speed limit on the straightaways, while Andrew kept a lookout for deer. About 4 minutes later, they arrived at the intersection of State Route 33 and Greenbrier. Andrew navigated them to Tall Pines Road, and Sarah turned on the floodlights. Andrew muttered,
"No one ever has their address clearly labeled."
As they slowly drove, they passed 7690, and then they came upon 7694. But where was 7692? Sarah pulled over, and Andrew called dispatch. They tried to reach the number the caller left, but it was disconnected. Sarah Googled the address, but it didn't find a location, and the satellite images showed only a field and woods. Andrew got out of the cab and scanned up and down the road, hoping to find a flattened piece of earth showing where cars might be traveling in and out, but he saw nothing. He heard a faint clicking sound come from deep within the woods, and then he heard a man yelling for help. He yelled back to the man, but it was like the man couldn't hear him, and he just continued to yell.
"Help! Help me!"
Andrew updated dispatch, and they made it clear that he and Sarah were to stage until police got there. But there was such panic in that man's voice that Andrew knew he couldn't just walk away and wait. Sarah got out of the cab, went to the back, and got her bag. She walked over and stood with Andrew. "We're going, right?" He nodded and said,
"Yep."
238, advise confirm staging.
Andrew leaned into the cab and picked up the mic.
238, negative on staging. Patient seems urgent. Will continue on foot and rendezvous with Leo upon arrival.
238, 10-4, status checks every 3 minutes.
238, 10-4.
238, on scene, 257.
Andrew grabbed his paramedic bag, hooked the handheld radio to his belt, and they stepped away from the safety of their rig. It was still early in the spring, so the vegetation was sparse except for the evergreens. The sticks and leaves crunched under their boots and the extra weight from their jump bags. They heard the man call out again, but this time it was louder.
Help! Help me!
Good, Andrew thought. We're getting closer to him and we aren't that far from the road. He called out to him.
Hello? We're here to help. Where are you?
The clicking sounds that Andrew heard before, he heard again, but this time they were much louder. He wondered if it was some kind of animal that might have caused harm to this man who was yelling for help. So they both stopped and listened. The radio broke their silence.
238, advice status.
And Andrew clicked on the radio.
238, just off the side of the road. Patient sounds closer. Going to continue.
238, 10-4, 0300.
Help! Help me!
The voice cried out again. And Sarah pointed to a clearing just beyond a stone wall. And they made their way over to the 4-foot wall. It was crudely made with stones still covered in the dirt that they were pulled from, but it seemed solid, so Andrew climbed up and over. And Sarah had to throw her bag over first to make sure she could get over without falling on her face. Andrew called out again, but the man no longer responded. And as they walked farther and farther from the road, he became more frustrated. He did not want to turn back when he knew someone needed help, but at a certain point, that decision would have to be made. Breaking him from his thoughts and stopping them both in their tracks, that sound again. And it sent shivers down their spine.
238, advice status.
Andrew clicked the handheld mic.
238, preparing to turn to the rig. Patient no longer calling out and unable to locate.
238, 10-4, 0303.
Neither one of them wanted to leave someone in distress out alone in the cold and the dark. With the radio check and the Leos on the way, there was a sense of security as they pushed the bounds into this unknown situation, even if it was a false security. Sarah continued and walked ahead of Andrew, calling out as loud as she could, one more time. But nothing. As she turned and she asked Andrew, what was that sound? And Andrew was honest.
I don't know. I've never heard anything like that before, but I also don't spend time in the woods, so I don't know.
The trees began to creak and groan just at the edge of the clearing as if the wind had picked up. And Andrew stood fixed on that spot, trying to sort it out. This is no good, he thought. And we gotta get out of here. And they both stumbled back, and a flash of light pierced the darkness. Brilliant orange and soft yellow, whites and pinks. From where they stood, about 10 feet ahead of them, the night gave way to this strange illumination. It looked as if the sky in front of them just ripped open and revealed this brilliant light show, and their curiosity gave way to trepidation as a long black mass appeared to step out of this tear in space, followed by another long black mass, and then finally, an entire creature stepped right into this world, right in front of Andrew and Sarah. It was massive, easily 10 feet tall. The legs were long and narrow and very dark. The arms were lanky and spindle-like. The body was rectangular but black definition, and the head was oval with this brilliant golden amber-colored eyes that seemed to glow. And the creature was darker than black. It seemed to absorb the light that surrounded it. It had a hybrid gait as it walked, sometimes on 2 extremities and sometimes on 4. It slowly made its way to the right of the clearing, taking great care to observe its surroundings with each step. And then a second creature came out of the portal of light, the same size, the same shape, moved in the same way. And this one took position to the left of the clearing. And they were holding space for something, which filled Andrew with dread. What was coming next? Then a third creature oozed out of the portal, and it was much larger, thicker. The head was reminiscent of an eagle, and Andrew reached out and grabbed Sarah's arm. He needed physical contact to keep himself steady and grounded. He needed to know that she was seeing the same thing. And she didn't move the entire time he held her arm. And then finally snapping back into reality, and he realized how much danger they were in, he put his bag down gently, and he took a few steps back. And the creatures didn't seem to notice. And Sarah followed his lead, and they made their way backward, further into the darkness of the night, seeking shelter behind a thicket.
238. Advice status.
Internally, Andrew said every swear word in the English language while fumbling to get the radio off his belt and turn it off. The creatures, now focused in their direction, stood tall. They were so tall. And the one in the center let out this piercing shriek that caused Sarah to cover her ears. And the 2 sentinels sprung forward with amazing speed. And Andrew could hear and feel their massive feet striking the ground as they moved over the rough terrain like smoke. Andrew held his breath till his lungs burned, his racing heart now lodged in his throat. Sarah was still holding her hands to her head, curled up in a ball, but Andrew did not take his eyes off those creatures. He watched every forward movement they made. They keyed in on their bags, and they made a beeline straight for him, circling them like a pack of wild dogs circle their prey. And Andrew saw his opportunity. He turned the radio back on, and he threw it as hard as he could in the direction that the creatures came from. And with divine timing, as soon as that radio hit the ground, dispatch called out for a status update, and the creatures snapped up from the bags and they took off in pursuit. And Andrew's eyes traveled from the 2 sentinels to the massive creature that came through the portal last, and to his horror, it was staring straight at him. He had not fooled this one.
"Get up, Sarah. Go now," he screamed.
And they ran as fast as they could through the field, their feet trying to maintain the grip with the bumps and the dips of the terrain. And Andrew had an advantage, so he outpaced her. They could hear the sentinel creatures behind them in pursuit. Sarah's lungs ached to keep up with the pace and the fear, and her boots were so heavy, and she didn't feel like she was moving at all in comparison to these creatures' ability to glide effortlessly over the earth. She looked back, and she saw that third creature spread enormous wings and shoot into the night sky, diving straight for them at the apex of its launch. That's it, she thought. I'm going to die. Andrew made it to the stone wall and he easily made his way up to the top. He sat there, straddling both sides, bracing himself, waiting for Sarah. And she knew what he was going to do, and she loved him for it. And she dug down deep and picked up the pace, placed one foot at the base of the wall, and jumped into the air, her outreached hands locked with his, and he flung her over the wall just as the creatures crashed into it, causing them both to fly backwards and hit the ground hard. And they scrambled to their feet, rushing towards the road. And the woods here were so dark that it was hard to see more than a foot in front of them, and they slowed their pace from sprinting to jogging. They didn't hear the creatures pursuing them, but it was hard to hear anything over their gasping for air and their heartbeats. Finally, they saw the ambulance and they heard sirens close by. As they emerged from the woods, the police were getting out of their cruiser.
What's wrong?
The officer yelled with his hand on his gun. Andrew was able to get out between big gulps of air.
I'm not sure if you'd believe me if I told you.
And Sarah snapped, "Shh!"
Help! Help me!
The ominous voice called once again, and Andrew screamed no at the top of his lungs, and laughter could be heard from deep in the woods. The sky lit up bright orange and then plunged into darkness, and after several minutes, the comforting sounds of crickets and frogs could be heard. Andrew had been so focused on that call for help that it never occurred to him how silent the landscape was before they ventured out. One of the officers, an older man, stared at the two medics.
I grew up in these woods. It was real stupid of you two to head out there without any help. Many people go missing here, and many are never seen again. And those who do make it back, well, they tell stories of hearing someone call for help. It's like the call of a siren luring you in. Professionally, these are missing people who probably succumbed to the elements or wildlife, but personally, I think these people are some kind of sacrifice. Not many people come up here anymore, which is most likely why you got a call for an emergency to an address and a phone number that doesn't exist. The locals here have respect for this land, and I've learned to have respect for the ancient teachings. They've placed barriers made from the soil, like mounds or rock formations, to keep whatever is taking people contained. You're lucky you made it back.
And Andrew and Sarah just stood there in silence, trying to reconcile what had just happened. What were they going to tell people? Lost in thought, they heard the radio.
238, advice status.
And Andrew reached into the cab of the ambulance and grabbed the mic.
238. Back in service.
Thank you for listening. Good night. Sleep tight under starry skies until morning light. Welcome to Mr. and Mrs. Creeps. Tonight's story features a doctor of a small town as he returns from a long-deserved staycation to find residents in chaos. Causing harm to themselves in fits of hallucination, the doctor is desperate to find the cause. All of his years of education and experience would not prepare him for the truth. Dr. Ernie Valbrandt had been practicing medicine for over 20 years. He started his career off with a drug manufacturer as an infectious control doctor monitoring patients in drug trials. Lots of paperwork and very long hours, but good money. He was able to quickly pay off his school loans. He fell in love with an amazing woman. He started a family and moved them to a small town. After what he saw at that lab, he wanted to be as isolated as he possibly could. His specialty now was family medicine 3 days a week and a hospital rotation twice a week. Between regular appointments, acute patients, and the rotations at the hospital, it was what a normal person would consider a mild work week in this small town. He got along well with his colleagues. He considered them to be very educated and dedicated to the health of their patients. They were the kind of doctors who would educate you and then gently guilt you into changing your eating habits and walking 10 minutes a day before prescribing medications for rising blood pressure or cholesterol or your sugar levels. On top of that, Sandy, Ernie's wife, cared so much about his patients that she would batch cook flavorful, healthy freezer meals and drop them off to the people who needed a little help getting started in the right direction. Their children were grown and had moved on to their own lives, but they stayed close to home. Everyone genuinely adored living there, even if it meant having to be more prepared and capable than the average American family, who tends to live in that just-in-time style of living that corporate America has created. It took well over an hour to get to the nearest grocery store. People had to plan and sharpen their skills to make sure they had food and firewood always on hand, not just in case of emergencies, but just to get through the week. Not many people were willing to live this way, so the town stayed small. There was a total of 3 doctors and 1 hospital designed to treat basic illness and traumas. Everyone knew one another. The center of town had a post office, town hall, library, a pizza shop. 1 street over was the fire hall, which also housed the 2 ambulances. And on the other side of town was the school, which was kindergarten through 12th grade, all in one building. No one revved their engines or gunned it down the road or did burnouts for fun. Mostly because if you broke your car, you had to fix it, and good luck getting parts in less than a week out there. Not to mention, the town policed itself. They never had any trouble. No one wanted to cause harm, and no one would allow someone to cause harm. It was quiet. It was serene. Just outside of town was the picturesque log cabin tucked away in the trees with a huge porch that Dr. Valbrandt and Sandy called home. This is where they were spending their staycation. They enjoyed the fresh air, the smell of pines, the sunshine, walks in the woods, and nights by the fireplace lost in books and each other. Heaven by some people's standards. But like all vacations, this one also had to come to an end. After his week-long staycation, Dr. Valbrandt headed back into town to open his office, which was located on the first floor of the hospital. He saw cars already in the parking lot, which was abnormal because he was an hour early. Normally, the parking lot was empty on that side of the building at this hour. He didn't even make it into the building before people started to approach him, begging him for help. After bringing everyone inside, he put 2 of the 3 patients and their family members in exam rooms and called his receptionist to let her know he was starting his day early. Peggy was a morning person, and she was chipper when she answered the phone. He could hear the smile in her voice as she sang the words, "Help is on the way." He was so thankful for her. His first patient suffered from a fever that set in the night before but was still very high. His second patient had a mild fever, and the muscles in her hands were starting to spasm and lock up. His third patient was also running a slight fever, and he said that sometimes he saw weird creatures out of the corner of his eyes, but when he blinked, they were gone. Dr. Valbrandt had no idea what could cause this sudden onset of signs and symptoms, but he didn't have time to think about it because it was non-stop all day. It was clear that whatever was happening, all the patients seemed to suffer from the same form of fever, muscle spasms, and hallucinations. At the end of his very long day, he met with the other two doctors and realized that collectively, they had seen 72 patients in the last 24 hours who complained of being ill. They talked about the need to report this to the Center for Disease, and they started the process. Exhausted, he rolled his window down on his drive home, trying to refresh his mind and body. Over the hum of the engine, he heard a woman screaming for help. He parked his car in the driveway of a familiar, dingy white farmhouse and made his way inside. His eyes scanned back and forth while hearing a commotion in the kitchen. He cautiously made his way deeper into the house and saw Carl, a man he knew, sitting at the kitchen table, ripping off his fingernails and muttering in a whisper, "You can't make me. You can't make me. I won't let you. You can't make me," over and over again. Dr. Valbrandt always had his old school doctor's bag and pulled out a sedative and administered it to Carl. He called for an ambulance and then began asking Carl's wife what happened. She said he hadn't been feeling well and that he was running a fever. He took a cold shower. He had gone to bed after he had some soup. He slept all day. She finally went outside to get the laundry off the clothesline, which she had left out there the day before because of all the commotion. And when she came back in, this is what she found him doing. The doctor sat there, desperately trying to connect the dots on what could be causing this widespread kind of behavior as the ambulance arrived. As a medical practitioner, it is improper to turn a patient over to someone with less experience than you, so not only was he obligated to ride in the ambulance, he truly cared and didn't want to leave Carl's side after seeing him in that altered state. Once at the hospital, the gravity of the situation became heavier. The few emergency rooms they had were filled, and the beds set up in the hallways were overflowing like a messed up game of Tetris. The only things that helped calm the situation were fluids and sedatives. Samples were being collected from each patient, but they needed to be sent off for processing. So until then, all Dr. Valbrandt and his colleagues could do was keep everyone comfortable and sedated to prevent them from continuing to hurt themselves or worse, somebody else. That course of action all changed when John, one of the first patients to present with this mysterious illness, jumped up out of bed, screaming at the top of his lungs. The nursing staff rushed into John's room to find him punching in the air and screaming in pure terror. The three nurses attempted to calm him down, but he swung wildly at them, calling them evil and telling them to stay away. Then suddenly he bolted to the window, yanked it open, and pushed out the screen and launched himself out of the third-story window. The nursing staff watched in horror, and when they looked down, they saw John bounce back up and run off into the dark. The room fell silent. How can a man sedated with a tranquilizer have a burst of energy to do what John had done? Dr. Valbrandt was at a loss and completely drained at this point. He needed food and he needed his medical books. On his way to one of the offices where he kept his books and a mini fridge stocked with emergency supply of protein bars, Dr. Valbrant saw a man dressed in a white suit come out of one of the patient rooms. He didn't recognize him, but he hoped that he would stay there so he could ask if he had any information that might be helpful. The man made eye contact with him briefly, turned in the other direction, and walked down the hall. Dr. Valbrant hurried into the room. His patient, a young woman, was lying there motionless. The cables that connected her to the machines that read her vital signs were now swinging below them. He rushed over and checked, but could not find a pulse. He yelled for help, and the nurses, who were still in shock over watching John jump out of the window, rushed in. They started CPR, and by this time his colleague, Dr. Bernstein, had shown up and stepped in as primary. Dr. Valbrant told one of the nurses to call the police and have them look for a man in a white suit, confident that he had something to do with this mess, and fled the room after him. He ran so fast down the corridors that the motion lights were slow to turn on, leaving him with dim lighting from hallway to hallway. He heard the door close, which led to a flight of stairs at the roof slam shut. He wasn't thinking at this point. He was already low on reserves and acting purely on instinct as he floated up the stairs, 2 at a time. He caught up to the man in the suit. The man was calmly standing by the edge of the building, like he was waiting for him. Dr. Valbrant, through heavy gulps of air, demanded to know who he was. He smiled and said, "Come on, Ernie. You know who I am." Dr. Valbrant was confused. He just stood there, nothing going through his mind, just staring into the dark eyes of this person in front of him. The man in the suit pressed on. "Where are you, Ernie?" A shiver went down Dr. Valbrant's spine. He felt dizzy and a little nervous. He took a step back to create some distance between himself and the unknown assailant, but it was too late. The man pulled out a canister from his pocket and sprayed Dr. Valbrant in the face, causing him to lose his footing and plunge over the roof edge to the sidewalk below. As he fell, he thought about his wife and his kids, and couldn't believe that this is how his life would come to an end. Ernie could hear the beeping sounds of a hospital room. He slowly opened his eyes. Sitting to his right was a woman in a physician's coat, who looked very much like his wife, Sandy. She introduced herself as Dr. Rose, and to her left was a man who introduced himself as Dr. White. Ernie's pulse was starting to race. He didn't understand what was happening and why he wasn't dead. Or maybe he was. He stared quietly at Dr. Rose, studying the features of her face. When she finally spoke, it was like a crushing heaviness filled him. Ernie had imagined everything. He was not a doctor. Sandy was not his wife. There was never a mysterious contagion. He was suffering a psychotic break. The chase up to the roof and the shock of his death was a technique used by Dr. White to shock him back into reality. This reality. Ernie felt all his emotions all at once, and he just stared. Finally, he asked, "How long have I been here?" 8 months. 8 months of his life gone. His body was sore and he felt shaky. It took an entire week before he began to get stronger, as he was able to move more and he became more lucid. With the help of Dr. Rose, he remembered the loss of his family while staying at their mountain home as the moment his world fractured. A tragic accident when the generator exhaust filled the rooms while they slept. Ernie couldn't remember why he wasn't there that night. but Dr. Rose assured him that that would come with time and to be patient. He thought he should feel some deeper form of grief or sadness, but he felt numb. Perhaps this was a coping mechanism. Another month went by, talking daily with Dr. Rose about who he really was and what his life was like, and he began to feel okay. He was shocked that anything like this could have ever happened to him, and he was a little ashamed. Finally, the day came for him to be discharged. He was scared, but he was ready to leave. The first place he went was back up to the cabin to confront that darkness that hid inside him. It was a long drive alone with his thoughts and self-doubt. Finally arriving, as he gazed upon the big house, it looked comforting to him. But as he walked over the threshold of the now vacant house, he wasn't sure if he could continue forward. He took a deep breath and made his way into the living room and sat on the worn-in sofa and pulled out a box of photos. He saw his beautiful wife, Lisa, and their 2 children, and he sobbed uncontrollably. The guilt was so overwhelming that he had to lie down before he passed out. And he turned his head and looked across the room at all the memories that were coming back. And he noticed an envelope just under a bookcase. It stood out because while everything was coated in dust, the house was well organized, and this was out of place. Leaving the sofa seemed like an insurmountable task, but his curiosity drove him. After picking it up, he noticed that it looked as if it was just placed there. There was no envelope-shaped void in the dust on the floor, or any dust on the outside. Walking back to the sofa, he looked it over. It was just a plain white envelope that had the flap tucked inside. As he held it in his hands, he was trying to place the memory of it. He carefully opened it, revealing a handwritten note that read, "They lied to you. You are not crazy. Don't let them know you know, or they will kill you." Ernie's eyes floated to the top of the paper. There, he found a logo for a drug manufacturer where Dr. Valbrandt worked as an infectious control doctor monitoring patients in drug trials. The drug manufacturer that shouldn't exist. Thank you for listening. Good night. Sleep tight under starry skies till morning light.
My name is Steve, and I'm a 19-year-old college student on spring break from NYU, headed across the country, and I just picked up a dangerous hitchhiker. I was halfway across the country, headed back to Texas in my supercharged 1967 black on black Shelby GT Ford Mustang. She had 400 horsepower with 428 cubic inches of torque, and let me tell you, all 400 horses were galloping down that long stretch of road. My car was fluttering down the road like a butterfly, smooth and fast. I had my favorite pair of pitch black sunglasses on to block out the desert sun, and an ice-cold Mountain Dew up to my lips, sweat dripping off the can and sweat dripping off my face. The sun and the heat permeating my body and soul in some type of transcendental, high-speed, meditative state. I felt untouchable and connected to the entire universe all at the same time. I pressed further on the gas pedal, feeling the comforting feeling of the pedal touch the floorboards on old Eleanor. The speedometer rotating past the top speed. For that moment, my life was perfect. That's when a horrific scene cut through the perfection. That's when I saw it. The fluttering of a light blue hospital gown flowing in the wind as a man at full sprint ran across the desert and onto the road. It was like it was happening in slow motion. It was terrifying. The twisting and contorting of his screaming face. The flapping of the light blue fabric. I slammed on the brakes and somehow managed to come to a full stop from over 200 miles per hour without flipping over or hitting him. The rear end of my car slid and stopped mere inches from his legs, and he collapsed on the side of my car and gasped for breath and screamed for help. Between breaths, he got out the words, "We need to run. We need to run. You need to help me." That's when I noticed it. It was immediately recognizable, even though I hadn't actually seen this in person before. The shaved spot in the back of his head, the electrical port inside of it, the bracelet he was wearing. You have got to be kidding me. Neuralink. I must be dreaming. I must have said that part out loud because he said, "You're not dreaming. This is real." And then outstretched his arm to point at a massive, barbed wire fenced complex way off in the distance. He then grabbed my face with both his hands and said, "It's not safe. We need to leave now." I must have collapsed to my knees in shock and disbelief, because the next thing I remember, I was picking myself up off the pavement and opening the passenger door. For some reason, I trusted him. I mean, this may be unbelievable, but at the same time, it was undeniable. We now had an insanely serious situation on our hands, to say the least, but that was just the beginning of it. I was now in shock, with my entire body shaking from the rapid unfolding of unbelievable events. I attempted to take a swig of my Mountain Dew to relax, but I just spilled it all over my face instead because of my shaking hands. He then shouted, "We need to go, man." The keys bouncing and clanging in my hand as I attempted to put them into the ignition. My heartbeat pounding in my eardrum. The keys dropped. I bent down to pick them up and accidentally pushed them further out of reach under the gas pedal. That's when I heard him go, "Drones, drones, go, go, drones, we need to go." I gathered every ounce of focus and strength I had to pick the keys up, get them in the ignition, and slam through the gears until we were going over 100 miles per hour. We were now running for our lives, with a flotilla of drones behind us, coming from the Neuralink complex. I said, "Don't worry, I can outrun these." Old Eleanor is much faster than a drone. He replied, "Man, are you kidding me? Take a look closer." I glanced in the rearview mirror, and they were on our ass and screaming closer. They were military turbine-powered jet drones, like with advanced weaponry on board and everything. Reaper drones. I muttered, what's the plan, man?" He said, "Hold on, I'm thinking." "Okay, if you think this can't get any crazier, just hold on a second, because this is where the story really takes a wild turn." And that's when I saw it. Some type of prototype military jet was now directly in front of my car, headed in our direction, mere feet off the pavement. It then scooped its nose upwards, and the air from underneath its belly pan pressed on my car so hard the frame of my car was sparking and grinding on the pavement. It was then gone. The unknown patient in the passenger seat had his eyes closed again, and I said a little louder this time, "What is the plan?" He didn't reply, and I could no longer speak because the same jet was now rotating backwards in a slow barrel roll in the sky in front of us and coming back towards us again upside down. Before I even recognized it, it was happening. There were thousands of streaking missiles headed in our direction. All I got out was, "Dude." Again, our unknown patient sat silent with his eyes closed. This was the end. I joined him. I closed my eyes and grabbed his hands. That's when I heard it. One by one, thousands of rapid-fire concussions went off as each missile hit its target. But why was I hearing it? Shouldn't I be dead? I opened my eyes. Our car was untouched. The jet was gone. I glanced in the rear view. Nothing but smoke. "That was badass," he said and smiled. "I'm sorry, I'm confused. Are you saying that?" I asked. He knew what I was implying. "Yep," he said. My mind was having a hard time keeping up with the unfolding of events. I knew what this meant, but my mind was exhausted. This was like some form of the movie Terminator or Matrix in real life. Patient Zero was in my car, and the table had turned on this secret Skynet thing that was just starting up. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the vast Texas landscape. Me and Patient Zero driving down a desolate stretch of highway. The radio crackled with static. offering no solace from the eerie silence that enveloped my surroundings. My tank was low, and the next gas station seemed miles away. It was this remote and isolated realm that I encountered him, a hospital patient sprinting into the desolate highway screaming for help. I broke the silence. "So, what's your name, man?" "John. Name's John." "Okay, John. Do you think they will send any more of those things our way?" "No. Anything they send our way will get destroyed and can also be taken over by me. I have access to the mainframe. Let me start from the beginning." He then explained what happened. He explained how he fell asleep at his computer working on a project for a client, and that he was a veteran computer programmer, and that he understood computers likely better than anyone else currently alive on the planet. He went on about how he then woke up in the Neuralink facility, where he was told he had to sign a legally binding contract, and that upon signing it, he would gain access to an entirely new world that the rest of the world does not have access to. And that's why the transport to the Neuralink facility had to be so secretive. He laughed and explained how comical it was that they tried to put a positive spin on their kidnapping him. He then said he had no
Welcome to Mr. and Mrs. Creeps, entertaining stories with a little extra as you drift off to sleep. Turn your lights down low and rest your eyes. Please enjoy the show. The wind was picking up. As I sat on the floor going over my checklist, I found my thoughts wandering to more nostalgic times. Times when a winter storm meant you gave yourself an extra 1 or 2 hours to get to work or school, but now in this place, with the potential of a moderate storm, we were on lockdown. Growing increasingly annoyed at the overstep of our leaders to prevent people from existing freely in the world, I felt a nudge on my arm. Echo, my midnight black dog, brought me back from the ethers where I often spent my time. Slow breath in, slow breath out. Let it go. I never have to speak to E. She understands me on a level no living creature ever had before. Okay, back to the checklist. New batteries in Echo's feed and water dispensers. I had water, fresh produce, nuts, granola, thermals, and battery banks set out just in case we lost power. E and I have experienced the loss of electricity and heat several times over the past few winters, despite the rise in my heating bill to the power company, so we were experts in surviving for long durations in below freezing temperatures and surviving well. When the power's out, it's peaceful. It's comforting to not be bombarded by electrical waves. It's the only time that the ringing in my ears ever stops, and I can feel the world around me. I'm confident that we're all set. I'm excited to put on a scary movie, grab the blankets, and just curl up with Echo while the wind howled outside. And I nodded to E that it was time for her to go out one more time before the peak of the storm. Walking through the kitchen, I felt the floor was starting to get cold from the Arctic air that the storm was bringing in. I opened the door, expecting E to burst into the yard and chase down every dangerous leaf that made the mistake of rolling through, but instead, she stood quiet, head low, ears slightly back, tail motionless. Something was very wrong. E was a very loving and smart dog, but she successfully and aggressively chased off coyotes and bears. So to see her not cross the threshold and maintain that stance was unsettling. Standing with the door open, I held my breath and I listened, trying to sense what E was picking up on. In comparison to her ability to feel energy and the heightened sense of smell and her ability to see in low light, my senses were crude. I was going to have to go into that yard if I wanted to know what bothered her. I decided that I would leave E inside for the first sweep, just in case there was a downed wire or an agitated animal that was displaced from the storm. And if I didn't find anything, I would take her out on a lead just a few feet from the door and we could run back in if we needed to. I put my boots on and my jacket and grabbed my hunting knife, and I told myself there's no time to think, just need to keep moving forward, be alert. Then I opened the door and I stepped 1 foot out and E whined. I looked back at her concerned face. She almost looked sad. She would be fine though. Even if something happened to me, my parents adored her, and if I didn't check in with them, they would come check in on her before they checked on me. So I made sure I closed the door behind me, and I stepped into the porch. There was a slight charge in the air, and I wondered if there was a downed power line. My first step into the yard was normal. The ground was not fully frozen yet, so my foot sank just a bit, and the second step brought me to the bridge of a large ship. The floor was metal, and it had an intricate pattern on it. There were windows lining both sides of the walls. The front was filled with consoles and windows in front of those, and those windows doubled as holographic screens. And for a moment, I wondered if I was dead or lying unconscious on the ground, and this was my mind's way of dealing with it. But I smelled the salt from the ocean, and I felt my knees buckle with the waves. And there was sunlight shining on my arm, and I felt its warmth. And then I realized there was a person in the room, and he was dressed in dark gray pants with gray accents and a gray-colored shirt. And he made some motions in front of the screen, and it turned blue. And he walked over to me, and he held out his hand and introduced himself as Jim. And I blurted out, "Am I dead?" He smiled, and his smile was kind and comforting. And he shook his head and said, "No, you're not dead. You've been chosen, and I'm here to help you on this part of your journey. I'm sure you have more questions, but it would be best if you sat down and buckled up. The next part of this gets a little bit exciting." And I think I followed his instructions out of shock, but I sat down and I secured this 5-point harness around me, and Jim came over and he tightened the straps, and he smiled and he walked back to the consoles. My gaze drifted out the side windows, and I saw nothing but water and sky, and I was humbled at how small we were in such a large ship at the vast sea of gently rolling waves. And a feeling of calm just suddenly washed over me. I was staring at the water, trying to figure out if I was hallucinating or not, when I noticed that we had company. A pod of dolphins was keeping pace with us, jumping in and out of the wake over one another. It was mesmerizing. Their colors of light and dark grays matched Jim's outfit almost perfectly. As we glided through the waters, they started to become iridescent. At first, it was a soft glow of brilliant bright white that eventually became so bright that they were hard to look at. I turned to Jim, and just as I was about to draw his attention to these angelic dolphins, I noticed under his feet was a circle that was also starting to glow in the same manner. We picked up speed, and the waves became unnoticeable as we skipped over top of them, and the dolphins were still with us, My heart was racing, and my hands gripped the straps of the harness so tightly that my hands began to hurt. And I said, breathe. Slow, deep breaths. We were going faster and faster, and as I thought the dolphins were going to fall behind, they rocketed forward, leaving a trail of light that culminated in one single point right in front of us. And Jim seemed calm, and he was able to keep the ship steady. There was nothing I could do but hold on, and we entered the sphere of light at such a high speed that I became disoriented and lightheaded. Then there was this flash, and as my eyes adjusted, I realized that we were gently gliding in a brand new place. The water here was deep blue and calm, and the only ripples were caused by our presence. And I loosened the grip on the straps, and I unbuckled myself. And I was still a little unsteady, but I made my way over to Jim, and he placed his hand on my shoulder, and I instantly felt better. And he said, "Welcome to Lyra Vega." He tapped his fingers in the air above the screen, and it blinked off. And then this cave materialized in the distance. We stayed in silence as he skillfully maneuvered between the thick walls, going deeper into the darkness. The opening behind us closed, and as it did, soft lighting appeared just beneath the surface of the water like a runway. And a few minutes later, I spotted a platform, and Jim docked the ship. He motioned for me to disembark, and I stood on the platform in amazement of how massive this cave was. It was then I heard a familiar voice. "Hey, stranger, I see you finally decided to join us." And I was confused. There in front of me stood an old friend whom I had not seen in years, but I dearly adored. I called him Sphinx because he was obsessed with Egyptian folklore and even more obsessed with the pyramids. "Sphinx, I don't know where I am. I don't know why I'm here. And I don't know why you're here." He says, so you're not up to speed." "Yeah, Jim's a great captain, but he's not big on the details. Come with me and I'll fill you in." And we walked for at least a half mile before we came to a flight of stairs that led to automatic doors, and he led me down hallway after hallway, and we ended up in a room that looked like a lecture hall. And he gave me some water, and he sat down, and what he told me changed the course of my life. We are at war. There is no other way to put it other than there is true darkness that exists, and the light that humanity naturally has been keeping that darkness contained. The darkness has done everything possible to keep the divine nature of humanity suppressed. Humans are so strongly connected with source energy that they are masters at creating something from nothing. They can heal themselves and each other with just intentions and their emotions, just like they can hurt each other. And even though they are inundated with crises after crises that are meant to keep their spirit in anxiety and worry, they are at their very core love, hope, joy, and determination. It is because of that the darkness has been contained. This has recently changed. The dark has poisoned the water, poisoned the food, the air, the land. It has taken technology that came from pure inspiration and hid it for its own use after killing its creator. It's trapped children in an unnatural education system and indentured everyone in a toxic, unbalanced economic system. It has turned men and women against one another. It has created sickness and disease with a false medical system that touts itself as a savior. It hides behind pointing fingers at governments, corporations, world leaders, and conspiracy theorists. And it works. If people are distracted, they won't seek the truth, right? All of this is to keep humanity dim so that the light they have won't ever be known. If humans ever knew their true nature, the darkness could not exist. We don't know exactly how, but they are stronger, and humanity is in danger of being wiped out. That cannot be allowed. If humans were collectively ever aware of their true power, the light would be so bright it would touch every realm from what was to what is to what will be. And you have a bright inner light. An echo was sent to you as a guardian. She's sort of a watchdog to let us know if you are ready and to keep you safe. She thinks very highly of you. Oh, Echo. I had completely forgotten to be concerned for her, and Sphinx held his hand up to me and then he waved it at the back wall, and an image of Echo lying safely with my parents appeared, and I instantly felt relieved and scared for them at the same time. What must they be going through now that I'm missing? And Sphinx continued to say, if you stay, your parents will be targets, but Echo will stay with them as their guardian. They will be safe with her, and we will send them divine support so that they celebrate you and not grieve you. But it's your choice. You can return to the life that you left, just as you left it, or you can stay here and fight. Being a warrior of the light, it can be as simple as providing comfort to someone, or it can be diving into the depths of hell, riding a dragon, absorbing the dark and turning it to light. I stared at Echo with my parents. I felt her, I missed her. And there was a long pause as I just stared. At any other time, it must be easy to choose between divine purpose over the rat race of life, but right now it felt oppressive. And just as I made the decision to go into the backyard to check it before I let Echo out, I told myself there's no time to think. I just need to keep moving forward and be alert. And I half smiled at Sphinx and said, dragon in the depths of hell, huh? And he smiled back and said, well, an ethereal dragon in the depths of hell. Her name is Freya. I think you'll like her. Thank you for listening to part 1 of this story. Good night, sleep tight, under starry skies until morning light.
My name is Stephanie. I'm a 26-year-old college student from New York City, and I set out to hike the Appalachian Trail to escape the big city. Turns out it was safer here in the city. There's something lurking in the Appalachian Trail, and I saw it. This is my story. I got home from work around 4 p.m. and had just enough time to make it to the trailhead that day and set out on the trail. I laid out my hiking gear on my hardwood floor to double check one last time that I had everything I needed for the hike. It was glorious. I just stared at it. I had everything. My flashlight and my knife were my most important items. I would have them accessible at all times in case of emergency in my fanny pack. I know. Who wears a fanny pack anymore? But my grandma got it for me for the trip, and ever since I thanked her for it, I felt like I would feel guilty if I didn't bring it. And now, honestly, it seems like it might be a lifesaver to put my emergency items in it to have accessible at all times, as opposed to having to take off my backpack and rifle through it to find my knife or flashlight while a bear is attacking me. Thanks, Grandma. This was it, the big day. I was leaving to hike the Appalachian Trail. I tossed my pack in the backseat of my car, and it made a thud. It must have weighed over 75 pounds. I could barely carry it to my car, and now somehow I was going to carry it thousands of miles. But as I hiked, I knew the weight would decrease as I ate the food items and discarded the items that I deemed were not essential. As I climbed in my car, my stomach rumbled. Crap. Food, I thought. I had food for tomorrow morning's breakfast, but I had not eaten tonight. And the only place I would be passing was a pizza place on the outskirts of town, Comet Pizza. I entered the coordinates of Comet Pizza into my GPS and took a swig of Dr. Pepper. I love Dr. Pepper. Anyways, when I got there, I asked if they had any slices left, and they said, sorry, all sold out, and asked if I would like to order a pizza instead. No, I'm not about to carry a flipping entire large pizza on foot down the frickin' Appalachian Trail, I thought to myself. But I was so hungry, I just said yes without thinking and ordered a large pizza. The pizza finally finished cooking and it was getting late, so eating would have to wait. I was losing daylight and I had to get to the trailhead. It took me approximately 25 more minutes of driving through the winding hills of Pennsylvania, and I finally pulled into the parking spot on the outskirts of the forest. The sun was setting, and the yellow and orange leaves were falling off the trees onto my windshield. It was beautiful. I loved fall season. I had picked the perfect time to go hiking, I thought to myself. I couldn't wait to take pictures and make memories. And honestly, just soak in the whole experience. It was going to be so therapeutic, I thought to myself. Or so I thought, at least, that is. I had no idea the horrors that were in store for me deep in the forests of the Appalachian Trail. It grew darker. There was only perhaps half an hour of sunlight left to hike into the woods and find a spot to set up my tent. So I literally just strapped the pizza box to my already massive backpack and slung it over my shoulders. It knocked me backwards, and I gripped the frame of my car as I began falling over and pulled myself up. That was close. Almost ruined my pizza. Thank God no one else was in the parking lot to witness this, but I will admit it was creepy being the only car in this parking lot. I locked my car. took a step forwards into the darkest looking woods I had ever seen. This was crazy. I've never even been hiking before, and here I was with a 75-pound pack strapped to my back and a large pizza strapped to it. This was going to be one for the record books, I thought to myself. As dust settled over the dense Appalachian forest, I found myself trudging along the narrow trail, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to lean in closer with each step I took. The dense canopy above me blocked out most of the fading light, casting eerie shadows that danced ominously around me. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching my every move with silent anticipation. I had embarked on this solo hike along the Appalachian Trail seeking solitude from the big city. But as night began to fall, the solitude felt more like isolation. The rustling leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot echoed through the silent woods, sending shivers down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that unseen eyes were tracking my every move from the shadows. As I pressed on, the trail seemed to grow narrower and more treacherous, winding its way through the steep ravines and thick undergrowth. The air grew colder, and a thick mist began to rise from the forest floor, enveloping me in a ghostly embrace. It was as if I had wandered into another world, a world where the rules of reality no longer applied. I turned on my flashlight. Crap, almost dead. It barely lit up at all, and I could hardly see its beam of dim glowing light on the trail in front of me. Dang it. I should have brought extra batteries, I thought to myself. Suddenly, the wind whistled and roared through the forest as the dark clouds of a storm system approached overhead. In the blowing wind, there was a cacophony of noises that sounded like human words, but all mixed up sounding. I'm talking like inside of an insane asylum sounding. I chalked it up to my mind playing tricks on me and put on my headphones to drown out the creepy forest and pressed play on a documentary about Oak Island that I had been meaning to finish. There really is something about that place, Oak Island. It fascinates me. So, anyways, I was walking for around 20 minutes, just listening to the documentary, when I realized it had grown so dark that I couldn't even see the trail anymore. I didn't really know what to do at this point, so I just pushed my way through some underbrush and found a clearing in the forest to set up my tent for the night thanks to the moonlight shining down during a break in the storm clouds. The forest in this location looked like something you would see in a scary video game designed to look ominous. It was unnatural. Can't believe I had to sleep here. But hey, you gotta do what you gotta do. So I dropped my pack and propped my almost dead flashlight against a tree so I could see enough to set up my tent. My tent I hadn't used this thing in over 10 years, since my freshman year in high school, and really had no idea what condition it was in, but I guess I was about to find out. I unzipped its storage bag, laid out the ground sheet and fly, and connected the tent poles. All was well until I finished setting it up and unzipped the entrance to get inside. That's where everything went wrong. Oh my god. It reeked. It was filled with candy bar wrappers, dirty paper towels, and just garbage. It was disgusting. There were even stains all over the sides of the tent. The brown stains all over the tent really went well with the yellow nylon fabric. They say not to eat food in your tent because it will attract bears, and I was hoping that I would just get lucky with my gross, smelly tent. But to be safe, I grabbed handfuls of trash and threw it outside my tent so the bears wouldn't come inside. I climbed in my tent, set up my sleeping bag, and grabbed a slice of pizza. That's when I heard the rain start to hit the ceiling of my tent. Luckily, my tent had that good type of rainfly that allowed the door to be unzipped and still not allow to get rain inside. I sat there eating my pizza, drinking a Dr. Pepper while recording an update from my followers online of my progress on the trail. And that's when it happened. In the middle of the recording, suddenly, without any warning, a streak of light, no, a streak of fur illuminated by my dim flashlight passed in front of my tent and in front of my face at inhuman speeds. I tensed up and squeezed my can of Dr. Pepper all over my face and shirt and shouted, "Hey!" Whatever it was, it didn't even make a sound, and I didn't know where it had went. It was just gone. Again, I screamed, "Hey!" and nothing came back. Not the snap of a twig, nothing, just silence. I gripped my fanny pack, pulling out my pocket knife, and gripped it with all the force I had. What was that thing? Was it a deer? A bear, maybe? A person? Did a raccoon jump inches from my face for some reason? I just kept scanning the woods in front of me and around me for any sign of whatever that thing was. I was still recording. I just kept rambling out loud, the thoughts running through my mind, having a full-blown panic attack live on camera. My eyes darting left, right, up and down, scanning the woods for over 15 minutes until I calmed down. Was it a deer? I thought to myself. In my mind, that is the most likely case due to its speed, but deer aren't that graceful and usually make a crashing sound. I mean, this thing never made a single sound and ran past my face at what seemed like 50 miles per hour and blurred out of sight. I was scared it would come back, and now I'm too scared to sleep. At this point, I was just sitting inside my tent, frozen still in the absolute silence in the pitch black, since my flashlight had died, and all I can do is stare at my phone for comfort to distract me from whatever is out there. I knew I shouldn't have brought pizza in my tent. And now, even worse, I'm covered in sticky Dr. Pepper. This thing is bound to come back. I'm scanning the perimeter of the woods, looking for any sign of movement. I'm convinced this thing is just beyond the trees, or more likely, right behind my tent where I can't see. I should just jump out and turn around and face it. I know it's right behind me. I'm typing this up on Reddit while I try to distract myself from the forest and the thing outside my tent. Please reply if you are reading this. Sincerely, Stephanie. And if I don't respond, I got out of my tent and didn't make it back.
Hello and welcome. Tonight's story will feature relaxing rain sounds mixed with an allegedly true story about a house that serves up your biggest fears in New England. If you enjoy falling asleep to creepy stories, then please consider subscribing to this channel, hitting the like button, and leaving a house emoji, and if you dare, an emoji showing your biggest fear. Thank you for choosing to close your eyes and rest your active mind with me. And now, let's begin. Life got hard, and the choices that I had been making were leading me down the wrong path. I had met these two guys, Rocky and David, and we started breaking into houses, and that's how we made our money. And David, he was alright, but Rocky, he was mean. He used to wear a camera when we broke into someone's house, and if someone was home, he would beat him up really bad, and then he would rewatch the video of him doing that. Just mental. And at some point, I just became afraid to walk away, so I stayed. Things were getting tight, and we ended up close to my hometown. We made our way up there, stopped in at the bar, and I see David talking it out with this group of guys. And he comes over and he is grinning from ear to ear. And he says that the group of guys were telling him about this abandoned house where these two older people used to live, and that it was just full of heirlooms, gold coins and jewelry, candelabras, silver, china, you name it, and it was left there. And Rocky was excited because this seemed like an easy mark. And then I found out where it was located. It was the old farmhouse up on Trincope Road, and my heart sunk. You see, the guys that David was talking to, they weren't from our town. When the older couple had died, they didn't have any family. They didn't have a will, so the house went into probate. These guys were sent in from the insurance company to do some repairs so that the house could go to auction. They got in the early morning hours and were done in half a day. In and out. Nice and easy. But I knew better. Legend has it that if you went up to that house and you had skeletons in your closet, that house would break you. There were stories from as far back as when my dad was a kid about people going up there to repair the roof, and on the roof you see at the tree line werewolves, 10 feet tall, big, just staring at you. And these stories came from men who were hard workers and didn't rattle very easily. And they would come back, and more times than not, something bad would happen to them. One guy got into a car accident. One guy drowned in the lake. One guy went to sleep, and his wife said that he was screaming, sweat coming off of his forehead, and then he just went quiet and never woke up again. So I wasn't eager to go up there. But Rocky wasn't somebody you said no to, and he had already made up his mind that we were going up there. I told them everything I knew, and that I wasn't going into that house. And he laughed. That was ridiculous, but I didn't laugh. So we agreed I would drive the car, stay hidden, and that I would pick up the bags as they filled them, and then pick them up when they were done. The drive up there seemed to take forever. There are curves so dark that you can only see a couple feet in front of you. Paved road turned into gravel, and gravel turned into dirt. And then that's when the fog set in, which Rocky and David were excited about. It meant more cover for what they were about to do. You could see the moonlight shining through. It was straight out of a horror movie. So I parked. We went over the plan. I would stay, use a pair of night vision binoculars, and they would take bags and signal me when they were ready. The great thing about late fall in New England is that it gets dark about 5 p.m. and the sun doesn't come up until 7. So they were excited to have a very long time that they're at that house. I was less excited. With the plan details set in stone, I drove up to the house. They got out, and it was warmer than I expected, but I could hear that the ground was firm from being cold, and I could hear their footsteps as they walked towards the front porch. David turned around, and I knew that was my cue to leave. Pulled back out of the driveway, down the road to this little turnaround spot. And I waited. And sure enough, about an hour later, I see the signal. And I drive up there, and they have 4 huge duffel bags clanking around. Threw them into the trunk, not even concerned about the noise that they were making. I guess it didn't matter. There was no one for miles. But something about respect, you know? And they grabbed 4 more duffel bags, and nobody spoke a word. Rocky looked at me, sized me up, and then walked away. And David made eye contact with me. Something was different, but he kept going. So I pulled down the driveway again, and I sat in the turnaround, and it was so much colder. There was no sound, no wind, no leaves falling from the tree and hitting the ground, no owls, no birds, no coyotes, no nothing. And an hour and a half goes by, and I'm starting to get a little nervous. But then I see the signal, and I never thought that I'd be thankful to be seeing Rocky of all people again. But the car and drive, and I could hear the tires crunching over the gravel. Swear I felt every pebble. Something just felt off. Maybe my nerves were just getting to me. The longer you're at a place, the more risk you take. But then I just see David, and he's putting 2 duffel bags in the trunk. And he comes over to the driver's side window and leans in and smiles. Like, yeah, Rocky's still in there. I'm like, man, there's something going on with that basement though. There's a lock on the door. Yeah, I probably shouldn't go down there then. Let's not push it. It's like, yeah, but we got all night. David, I don't think it's a good idea. I just don't even think being here is a good idea. Yeah, well, Rocky's in there working on it now. Okay, well, do whatever you guys gotta do. Just do it quickly. David goes in, and he comes back out with 2 more duffel bags, presumably the ones that Rocky filled. And then Rocky comes out. So I get out of the car, and it is cold now. Skin immediately tingles, tightens up. It's hard to take a breath in. And he says, I got it. Grab the hacksaw in case there's copper down there. I just looked at Rocky. I got back in the car. David leaned in the back and got the hacksaw. And I just said, be careful, man. Keep your head on a swivel. And he said, you made it this far in life so far. And closed the door. So I drove back down to the turnaround and I waited. 1 hour turned into 2. 2 hours turned into 3. And my heart starts to race. And there is this knot in my stomach. And my throat is aching from trying to hold back the fear. Because either way you slice it, I have to go up there and see if they're okay. Or I have to drive away. And if I drive away, and Rocky comes walking out of that house and sees that I'm not there, I'm dead. It's at that moment, life came crashing down. I spoke out loud. I don't know if it's to me, if it's the universe, if it's to God, but I said that if things worked out okay, that I would make things right. But I can't undo the things that I have done, but I certainly can take responsibility for them, and I can change my course. And no matter how terrible of a person Rocky was, and the terrible things that David has done, that I wasn't able to leave them. And I meant it. I meant it, because now I'm in a situation where death is going to come for me. And I had made that decision to put myself there. And if I made it through, things were going to change. So I started the car, drove up to the house, opened the door, put the keys in my jeans pocket, grabbed my phone, grabbed a flashlight, and the night vision binoculars. Out there, where there's no sound, every step you take sounds like a freight train. There is no hiding. And the steps creaked as I walked up them, and the porch boards had nails starting to come up, so they moved every time you took a step, and I felt so exposed. And through the windows, you saw nothing. It was just dark. And I got to the door, and I yelled as loud as I could in a whisper, but no answer. And I took a step in, and then another, and I couldn't bring myself to take a third. I looked over to the left, and there were these heavy fabric drapes covering the windows, and they smelled like mildew, must. You could see, even in the dark, they were coated with dust. And the furniture was old and antique, wooden chairs, Victorian sofa. I could see where Rocky and David had been because drawers were left open, so I knew they must have been in that room. And I just stood there, listening. I didn't hear anything. I took a deep breath in, yelled as loud as I could, "Hey guys, I'm gonna leave you here. Where are you?" My voice echoed in the room, And that's when I realized that there were these vaulted ceilings and this huge staircase over to the right. And then I hear a creaking sound, like a door slowly opening. And I listen. I didn't hear anything else other than no footsteps, no breathing, no talking, no clanging of the duffel bags. And I thought, well, maybe it's the wind. So I closed the door. Whatever was going to happen was going to happen because I'm in this house now. And no matter what you believe, I believe something was wrong with this house. And I don't know why that older couple stayed here as long as they did, but I believe they had respect for this house. And I walked forward. And as I walked down the hallway between the dining room and the staircase, I saw the family photos of the older couple, and they looked nice, they looked normal. And I felt guilty, and I felt shamed. And I kept going, and I get to the kitchen, and on the right-hand side, I see the doorway to the basement, and it had come open, and that must have been the creaking sound that I heard. And I get to the top of the stairs. I yelled as loud as I could for Rocky and David, and I didn't hear anything. And tears are starting to come. I couldn't bring myself to go down there. And as I took a step back, I felt like someone was behind me. My breath quickened, I tensed, started to feel panicked, and I turned around quick. And there was no one there. Just thinking to myself, I gotta get out of here. But as I walked towards the hall, I hear a voice coming from the basement. Hey, don't leave me here. I think it was David. I don't know. So I run back to the basement door, yelling, David, is that you? I hear it again. Hey, don't leave me here. It's different. It's not David. It's more innocent. And now I don't know what I'm dealing with. And so I turn back to the hallway, and as I pick my head up from looking down the basement stairs, I'll never forget what I saw. I saw my sister. She was dressed in this little yellow sundress, with her hair pulled back. And I just stood there thinking, am I really seeing this? I'm not even sure I was breathing. I think I held my breath until my body forced me to take one. And then I heard the voice again from the basement. I can't believe you left me. And there are things from our past that we don't even know that we've forgotten. The look on her face was just acknowledgement that she could see me and that I could see her. And I took a step forward and another step forward. I was trembling, and I was finally close enough to touch her. And as I reached out, so did she. And when our hands met, it was like I was rocketed back to when we were teenagers. We were out at a swimming hole with a bunch of friends, and we were drinking and jumping off the cliff. And we had done this in the past, so nobody was worried. But all of a sudden, my sister just wasn't around, and nobody remembered when they saw her last. And we jumped in the water, and we all dove. We dove until our lungs burned, until our eyes burned, until we didn't have any more air left, and we couldn't find her. And as I climbed out of the quarry, I saw her little yellow barrette. I just left her there. They never found her, and I was never right. Parents blamed me. I blamed myself. And I'm looking right at her, and I'm hearing this voice say, I can't believe you left me. Because nothing hurt me more in this world. Of all the things that I have ever done, nothing hurt more than leaving her. And I wanted nothing more for her to forgive me for that. And just like that, we were back in the kitchen. The voice was now right behind. The only person who needs to forgive you is you. Have you learned your lesson? And I fell to the ground. There's just things in life where you know what the right thing to do is, but it's just the hardest thing in the world to do. And I sobbed, and I sobbed, and I sobbed. And when I finally stopped, I looked up, and I was alone, and the basement door was closed. and I walked towards the front door, knowing I may never see Rocky and David again. And when I hit the front porch, David was standing by the car, and I asked him, "Are you real?" And he looked at me, and he said, "It's time to go." I didn't question it. If David said we had to go, that meant Rocky was gone. The amount of silence that can be created between two people is palpable sometimes. And when David finally spoke, there was a tremor to his voice. He said in the basement there was this large old chest, and Rocky went over to it and just stood there like he was in a trance. So David went over there and tried to open it, but it wouldn't open. So he walked away. But then he heard the creaking of the hinges. Somehow Rocky had gotten the chest open. And then he heard Rocky say, "What the fuck is this?" So David went back over, and there were pictures in there of this woman with this little boy. And David's response was, "Obviously it's a family keepsake." And Rocky said, "That's my fucking mom and me." And then they both heard this woman's voice from the darkness. "Are you sorry for what you've done, Rocky? Are you sorry?" And then that's when Rocky said, "Fuck this," and he slammed the chest, and they both walked away. But then they heard the creaking of those hinges, and the chest opened again, and this darkness came out of it, slowly filling up the room. And just like that, Rocky was gone, and the chest slammed shut. And then the darkness cleared, and David tried to get the chest open. It just wouldn't come open. He's banging on it. He's yelling for Rocky. There's no noise. There's nothing. Rocky's just gone. So David ran to the steps, and he ran out. And he said that he didn't see the car there at the time. So he ran down to where I was parked, but that the car wasn't there either. And then he ran back to the house. There was no one. He said he thought that I had left him, that Rocky was gone, that he was alone. It's one of the worst things for him. He told me this heartbreaking story about his parents. David was a latchkey kid. He usually was alone for 2 or 3 hours before one of his parents got home. But one night, his parents never came home, and he was alone all night long. Just a kid. He just kept thinking that they would come. And finally, early in the morning, the police showed up and told David that both his parents, unfortunately, were killed. David's mom got off work early, so she went to go surprise David's dad. They were going to pick up dinner and have a movie night. David actually grew up really nice. They got caught at the restaurant in the crossfire of a robbery. And this guy was wearing a clown mask, like traditional red nose, white face, big red smile. David said when he realized that he was alone at the farmhouse, that he could hear the honking of a horn of a clown nose. And he just said that he never wanted his parents more than at that moment, and that he wished he had made different decisions in life. He said just like that, the door opened, you came through it, and then the car was right next to me. I don't know if David and I are lucky enough to not suffer worse fate now that we're not at that house. But I do know that I'm going to be a much better human going forward. And I don't know what happened to Rocky, and I don't know what he should have been sorry for. And that is the house on Trincope Lane. Sleep tight.
My name is Tim, and I'm a 25-year-old college student working at a local bar to make ends meet. I wanted to attend the big game this year, but I didn't have the cash, so I snuck in through a secret tunnel. But before I dive into that, let me tell you a bit about myself. I'm not usually one for superstitions or believing in the supernatural. I'm your regular guy working a crappy job at the bar, like I said, trying to make ends meet. My life revolves around trying to make enough tips to pay the rent, grocery shopping, and Netflix weekend binges. Sports were my escape, especially football. I lived for those Sundays when I could just absolutely lose myself in the game, cheering for my team. I'm talking full-blown losing my mind. It's a spiritual experience, collectively losing yourself with a crowd of people all living their lives through the team that they are cheering for that one day we live. Then we go back to our 9-to-5 jobs. Back to the story. I had always been a huge fan of football, and the big game was coming up, and that was the ultimate event. I had never been able to afford tickets, but that wasn't going to stop me from seeing the game. I had heard rumors of an underground tunnel that led directly to the stadium, and I was determined to find it. After hours of searching, I finally found what I was looking for. A small, unmarked door in the back of a Chinese restaurant. I knew this was it. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The tunnel was dark and damp. The air was thick with the smell of mold. I could barely see in front of me, but I pressed on, driven by my desire to see the game. After what felt like hours, I finally saw a light at the end of the tunnel, and my heart rate quickened with excitement. This was it. I was now entering the big game. I quickened my pace, eager to see what lay ahead. As I emerged from the tunnel, I found myself in a large, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with strange symbols. The air was thick, the smell of incense. In the center of the room was a large stone altar, and on the altar was a strange, glowing object. I thought, was this the ring? The trophy? Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. I turned around to see a group of robed figures emerging from the shadows. The figures began chanting in a language I didn't understand, and they were holding knives while chanting a hypnotizing spell and pointing down at me, winking at me, then forming the Illuminati symbol with their hands and winking again. I tried to run, but I was paralyzed under some type of spell by the melody. I began to move to the rhythm of the spell. The robed figures also began stepping in unison to the beat, stepping closer to me, sweeping left, sweeping right, sweeping to the beat, performing dance moves, raising their knives to the air, then slashing their knives downward, each step in a terrifyingly hypnotizing dance sequence, all while pointing at me, winking at me. They were getting closer. I screamed at the top of my lungs inside of my own head. Wake up, move, run. and like breaking out of duct tape hands, I broke out of the spell in my own mind and ran from the robed figures in a terrifying, horrifying sprint for my own life. I ran and ran until the sound of their chanting finally drew silence. I then proceeded to walk forward down the dark, damp tunnel, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the wall. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, and I could hear the sound of dripping water through the tunnel. As I walked, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched all over again. The walls seemed to be closing in on me, and I could feel my heart racing. Suddenly, I noticed something strange about the walls. They were covered in a thick layer of slime, and as I shone my flashlight on them, I could see that they were pulsating. It was as if the walls were alive, breathing in and out, waiting for me to get closer. I tried to turn back, but it was too late. The walls had already started to move, closing in on me from all sides. I could feel the slime oozing onto my skin, and I knew that I was trapped. I screamed for help, but my voice was swallowed up by the darkness. As I lay there, trapped in the tunnel, I now realized I was not alone. There was something else in the tunnel with me, something that was watching me, waiting for me to make a move. I could feel its presence all around, and I knew that I was in grave danger. I don't know how long I lay there, trapped in the tunnel, but eventually I heard a sound. It was the sound of footsteps coming closer and closer. I tried to call out, but my voice was weak. And then, suddenly, the footsteps stopped. I could feel the presence of the thing in the tunnel with me growing stronger. You know that feeling when you wake up and you think, no, you know something is there with you and you just don't want to move. That was me for hours. But then, just as suddenly as it had happened, the presence was gone. The walls stopped moving, and the slime disappeared. I was alone in the tunnel once again. At this point, I was convinced someone must have spiked my drink or slipped me something. This couldn't all be real. What the heck was going on? I'm not sure what was going on, but at this point, I thought, man, just screw the game. It's not worth dying for, and I decided to get the heck out of there. But that's when I saw it. A high-quality H2O golf cart for the football players. Yep, running. Keys inside. The headlights illuminating some type of ramp leading upwards towards the stadium. Well, I'm not very smart, clearly, because I hopped right in and pressed the gas. And then With a whir of the electronic engine, I was headed up into the roar of the stadium, and before I knew it, I was there. But the problem was, the ramp immediately spilled out onto the field, like as if it was right on the edge of the sideline. So before I had even realized I was on the official field, I panicked and attempted to slam on the brakes, but I literally slammed on the gas pedal by accident. The players were lined up on the line of scrimmage. Keyword were lined up, because so was the direction of my out of control golf cart. 90% of both teams were now being plowed over by the front end of my golf cart. Players stuck underneath and hanging from the side and roof. A massive pile of carnage. It was a spectacle. I finally found the brakes, but it was too late. It was over, and so was the game because of me. I ruined it. I ruined the careers of 90% of both all-star teams. As I slammed on the brakes, the players on the roof and front end of the golf cart slid off and spilled onto the field, revealing a horrific scene around me. Blood streaks behind me. Penalty on the field. The most horrific thing wasn't the injured or even possibly dead players, but the sight of the fans in the stands in front of me. Some had a look of shock and horror in their face, shielding their eyes with their hands. Others were filled with rage. Many crushed their beer cans in their hands with rage, spewing foam out of the cans and spewing rage out of their eyes. Others slammed their beer cans against their heads and screamed some guttural, primal, primitive, wild sound of madness. They began ripping the seats out of the concrete with the kind of energy you see only in moments of lifting a car off of a child to save their life. But this was different. They were coming to take my life, and there were thousands of them spilling around me onto the field from every direction around me. That's when the shots rang out. The military fired several high-caliber warning shots into the air, and let's just say that only made things worse. There were now shots coming from every direction. After all, this was Las Vegas, and it seemed that there was now a civil war taking place simultaneously with the riot that I had accidentally started. The sea of fans that had once cheered passionately for their teams now stormed like the ocean. The stadium lights began to flicker, and the strobing light illuminated brief moments of horror and rage. Toxic smoke began filling the air from the fires, and the military firing crowd deterrent weapons like smoke grenades, tear gas, and who knows what else. Now the lights completely went out, and the only light remaining was the light from the fires blazing and the flashes from the weapons going off. I could feel the vibrations of the crowd erupting into a full-scale earthquake. I heard a section of the stadium collapse, and thousands of screams rang out into the air at once. This was total chaos. As I glanced around, desperately searching for any sign of safety, but the chaos seemed to have consumed every inch of the stadium. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of angry shouts, breaking glass, thundering footsteps, bullets blazing. Panic clawed at my chest as I realized I was trapped in the midst of perhaps the worst riot in Earth's history. A surge of fear coursed through me as I tried to make sense of the madness. The rioters, once passionate football enthusiasts, had transformed into a raging, murderous mob, faces contorted with rage. Flares of red and orange illuminated the madness, casting eerie shadows on the twisted expressions of those around me. I stumbled upon a small group of people huddled together, their eyes wide with terror. We exchanged nervous glances, silently acknowledging the danger that lurked in every direction. The air was thick with tear gas and toxic smoke from stadium seats burning, and I'm pretty sure I saw a pile of all the turf ripped out of the field, burning in the center of the stadium. The crowd was carrying one of those giant field goals hoisted on their backs towards the fire in the center. They were burning everything. I think people had just had enough. This was the one night a year they get to escape their increasingly stressful lives. I think our entire nation was just at a tipping point, and that this was the straw that broke the camel's back. And that's when I blacked out. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed. The doctors told me that I had suffered a heart attack during the blackout. My blurry vision began to clear, and I could see and hear the TV hanging from the wall above my hospital bed. It was playing the local news. The horror I had escaped from was now returning 10 times worse than before. The news report says the golf cart crash occurred on the final play of the game in overtime, and not only did it kill 27 players, but it disrupted the outcome of the game at the peak moment of emotion, and apparently the fans lost their mind and burnt the entire stadium down. And now it's spreading across the city and across the nation. Even reports are coming in from Paris of full-scale riots and civil war spreading across many nations. But that's the least of the problems. There are reports of nukes going off in multiple nations as tensions have spilled over during the night, as multiple regions have lost control due to civil unrest spreading across the globe. They say they are moving me to another hospital because the hospital has to be evacuated because it has been set on fire. Some are saying the city is a total loss. I would say that is a major understatement, and that with nukes currently in the air, literally headed in every single direction you can think of, that this is the end, and I caused it by pressing the wrong pedal on a stupid golf cart during the football game. Well, I'm submitting this with the hospital's Wi-Fi, which is spotty at best since everyone is using it to place video calls to their beloved family members. I doubt this even gets successfully uploaded to Reddit with the spotty internet, and I doubt there will be anyone left to read it. As I type this, the nuclear missile warning siren just went off across the city, and everyone is climbing under the tables here with their hands over their heads. Dear Lord, I glanced over to my left. The hospital's room window offered a narrow view of the outside world, and as I strained to pull back the sterile curtain, my eyes widened in disbelief. The once serene night sky had transformed into a canvas of surreal horror. In the distance, streaks of incandescent light cut through the darkness, painting eerie trails across the celestial expanse. The sight was both captivating and paralyzing. The night had been swallowed by an unnatural brilliance, as if the fabric of reality had been torn open to reveal the impending chaos beyond. The nuclear missiles, their fiery trails stretching across the heavens, moved with a terrifying grace that defied the calamity they created. Each street marked a path of destruction, a trajectory that seemed to defy the laws of nature. The colors were hauntingly beautiful, a sickening palette of oranges, reds, and purples that clashed with the serene backdrop of the starlit sky. The missiles left behind a shimmering glow, a display that etched itself into the retinas, branding the observer with the harsh reality of impending doom. The night, once a cloak of comfort, now wore the garb of Armageddon. As I stood there, transfixed by the celestial dance of destruction, a wave of helplessness washed over me. The streaks across the sky were a sinister omen, a visual manifestation of the human capacity for self-destruction. It was as if the universe itself recoiled at the audacity of such an act, yet remained powerless to intervene. The air outside felt charged, pregnant with the weight of a world unraveling. The distant explosions too distant to shake the hospital windows, but close enough to send shivers down my spine. Punctuated the apocalyptic display. The once distant threat now felt tangible, an inescapable fate hurtling towards us at unimaginable speeds. In that moment, the world outside the hospital room ceased to be a mere backdrop to my existence. It became a theater of tragedy, a canvas on which the final act of humanity played out in fiery strokes. The streaks across the sky were not just physical entities, but metaphors for the irrevocable changes set in motion by me, irreversible and relentless. As I stood there, my breath caught in my throat, the world outside seemed to warp and twist in a grotesque ballet of destruction. And in that dreadful silence, with the ominous streaks across the sky as witness, I grappled with the surreal realization that the world as we knew it was succumbing to the merciless embrace of nuclear destruction. If we survive this, I promise to just watch the big game on TV next year. I'm so sorry. Sincerely, Tim.